The concept that people behave in predictable ways isn't a new concept. In fact, it goes back over 2,000 years. Since the time of the ancient Greeks, humanity has been fascinated by this concept. We all deal with time and tasks and people in predictable ways. In fact, the word personality comes from the Latin word persona, which referred to the masks worn by stage actors in Greek theaters. Have you ever seen those masks? There's a happy mask and a sad mask. They would wear those during the play so that you could know that's a predictable person. I know he's the villain. I know she's the heroine. Empedocles from the 5th century BC, so this is a long time ago, this is 2,500 years ago, believed that personality came from fire, air, earth, and water. But they were already onto the idea that personality is something that is predictable. Then we move ahead about 200 years. Hippocrates, about 200 BC, thought that personality came from 4 fluids within our bodies. Let's move up another 400 years to about the 2nd century. Galen, who's the father of modern physicians, believed that personality could be divided into 4 categories, which actually are still used today. You may have heard of these terms: choleric, sanguine, melancholic, and phlegmatic. Have you ever heard those terms bandied about? Well, that's from Galen. That's 1,800 years old. Well, the theory of personality took a major step forward in the last century. William Marston published a book called The Emotions of Normal People in 1928, and that was the beginning of the DISC profile that we are using during this course. So DISC itself has been around for over 90 years. Then psychologist Walter Clark developed these ideas into the DISC profile in 1956. So the whole point of me telling you all this story is not to give you a history lesson, but just to drive home the idea that this isn't a new concept, okay? This wasn't invented last Tuesday. Once this course is completed, you'll see that the truth of personality is self-evident and it's obvious. And I can tell you that with authority, because I have administered these assessments over the last 20 years to literally thousands of people, and they are very accurate, and they will explain so much to you about human relationships. So why have I chosen DISC to teach you today? I really could teach you any tool. I've worked with many of them. Many of the popular tools that you've heard of, I know or have worked with or have gone through myself. But I chose DISC, and one of the first reasons is just because of its simplicity. There are many excellent tools available today, but many of them are very complex. I remember one time sitting with a partnership group. There were 2 partners, and they were working on their relationship, and they had gone through a very expensive and elaborate personality assessment, and they got a book back. So it probably had 40 pages for each of them in a book, and they'd gone through and highlighted their stuff and everything, and they found it interesting. So I said, okay, guys, what are your top strengths and what are your top challenges that you bring to this partnership? Well, none of them could really say, because that's what happens when you have 40 pages. There's so much information, you're not sure what to really focus on. You can explain the DISC in 5 minutes to someone who's never seen it before. Your most entry-level hire can pick up DISC very, very quickly. It's meant for a team to communicate with each other. And that's one thing I like about it, because we need something that's easy to execute. If you've watched some of my other courses, you've heard me say this again and again. Simplicity equals focus. Complexity equals chaos. I'd rather have something that gives you 90% of the information that you can execute on right away than something that's perfect that you're never really going to put into practice. And by the time you're done this course, you're going to be really very good at finding other people's personalities and understanding your own in one simple course. Another reason I like DISC is that it just gives us a common language. We want the team to use a common language when they're discussing personality, or when they're discussing new hires, or when they're discussing customers. DISC is simple, it's easy to understand, and so it's quickly incorporated into your team's language. It's been around a long time. You don't have to fight with people that DISC is a relevant tool, because it really has proven itself over a long time. And when your team starts to say, boy, I dealt with that customer, oh, he was difficult, that guy was a high D, it gives us a common language to start to understand and be way more effective with each other and with customers. Another reason that I like the DISC tool is just the accuracy of it. The results from the DISC assessment are highly accurate and descriptive, unless you're deliberately trying to throw it or falsify it, which does happen. But if you fill it out honestly, it's going to give you really accurate descriptions of your personality. And by the way, I'm going to teach you what to do when people deliberately throw it as well. So it doesn't really matter what they put on the assessment because you're going to be able to see exactly who they are anyway. Another reason that I like DISC is just the credibility that the tool has. Most people have heard of DISC before. Probably you've heard of it. It's been in use for decades. It's a proven tool. There's no need to explain its value. It wasn't made up last Thursday. It's a tool that you can really trust just because it's been around for a long time. Now, I mentioned that there's been some updating, so let's go over what has been updated in the DISC assessment that you're going to be taking. In 1928, William Marston used the terms dominant, D, influential, I, steadiness, S, and compliant, C. So that was the terms that he used. Bear in mind, this was in 1928. This is about 90 years ago. These categories have been more recently updated to dominant as D, inspiring as I, systematic as S, and caring as C. These new terms, they're just more accurate, and they actually represent Marston's original ideas with more clarity. One thing that's been updated in DISC is the names of the categories. So today we're calling them dominant, which is D, inspiring, which is the I, supportive, which is the S, and conscientious, which is the C. These terms are more accurate, and they actually represent Marston's original ideas with more clarity. Who uses this DISC assessment? Well, it's a popular tool, and it's used by 70% of Fortune 500 companies. It's used by universities like Purdue University, among many others. It's used by many, many government agencies, and it's used by individual coaches, people like Tony Robbins. How well known is DISC? Well, over 44 million DISC profiles have been completed since 1970. Have I made my point? It's a trustworthy tool. Let's move on. Let's recap what you learned in this module. You learned the origins and evolution of personality assessment from the ancient Greeks to today. You learned why we're studying and implementing the DISC assessment instead of using another tool. And you learned who else uses the DISC tool.